Imagine this in a very ordinary moment. You're sitting somewhere, maybe at your desk, maybe on your bed, and something begins to build inside you. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a tightness in your chest, or your thoughts moving a little too fast, like a conversation that refuses to end. Your heart beats a bit harder than it needs to. Your shoulders rise slightly without you noticing. There is a sense that something is on, even if nothing around you demands it. Now someone tells you, very calmly, just take a deep breath. So you try. You inhale slowly, you exhale. Maybe you repeat it a few times. And yes, something shifts, but often it feels like you're trying to steer a large ship with a very small wheel. The effort is there, but the response is slow, uncertain, sometimes frustratingly incomplete. Then consider a different situation. You walk to a sink, turn on the tap, and splash cold water onto your face. Instantly, before you have time to analyze anything, your body reacts, your breath catches, your eyes blink hard, your heart does something noticeable, almost like it skips into a different rhythm. There is a sharp, undeniable change. What's interesting here is not just that both methods can affect how you feel, but that they operate in completely different ways. One feels like persuasion, the other feels like interruption. To understand why this difference exists, it helps to let go of a common assumption, that you are fully in charge of your body in any direct sense. It certainly feels that way. You decide to move your hand, and it moves. You decide to speak, and words come out. From this perspective, it seems natural to believe that calming yourself should also be a matter of decision. But most of what keeps you alive is not under that kind of control. Your heart is beating right now without waiting for your approval. Your blood pressure is adjusting moment by moment. Your organs are coordinating with each other in ways that are so complex you never even notice them. There is an entire layer of activity, fast, automatic, and deeply organized, that operates beneath your awareness. This layer is not concerned with your plans or your preferences. It is concerned with survival, balance, and efficiency. It responds to signals, not intentions. And the signals it listens to are often physical, rather than verbal or conceptual. When you try to calm yourself by breathing slowly, you are using a kind of indirect influence. You are taking something that you can control, your breath, and hoping it sends the right message downward into these deeper systems. Sometimes it works well. Other times, especially when the body is already highly activated, the message doesn't seem strong enough to make a significant difference. Cold water, on the other hand, does not rely on interpretation in the same way. It delivers a clear, physical signal, sharp, immediate, and impossible for the body to ignore. It doesn't ask the system to consider relaxing. It changes the conditions the system is responding to. And that difference between asking and triggering turns out to be the key to understanding why something as simple as cold water can sometimes do what careful, deliberate breathing cannot. Now consider something slightly unsettling, but deeply important. Your body does not wait for your permission. It's easy to feel like you are the central authority inside yourself, making decisions and directing actions. But most of what happens inside you unfolds without any consultation at all. Your heart speeds up or slows down, your pupils widen or shrink, your muscles tense or relax. All of this is happening continuously, guided by systems that operate faster than thought and far below the surface of awareness. Think of it like this. Imagine you are sitting in the passenger seat of a car that has two steering wheels, one in front of you, and one hidden somewhere deeper in the machine. You can turn your wheel, and sometimes the car responds. But there is another system, older and more powerful, that can override your input whenever it decides something more urgent is happening. This hidden driver is not intelligent in the way you are used to thinking about intelligence. It doesn't reason, it doesn't debate, it doesn't explain itself. But it is extremely effective at one thing, keeping you alive. When something in your environment suggests danger, uncertainty, or urgency, this system shifts your body into a different mode. Your heart rate increases to pump more blood. Your breathing changes to bring in more oxygen. Blood is redirected toward muscles that might need to act quickly. You become, in a very real sense, prepared for action before you even understand why. Now here's the important part. This system doesn't respond to thoughts in the way you might expect. You can tell yourself there is no danger, but if the deeper system has already detected a signal it interprets as threat, your words carry very little weight. It's like trying to calm a smoke alarm, by explaining that there is no fire. The alarm is not listening to language, it is reacting to input. Breathing exercises attempt to influence this system indirectly. By slowing your breath, you send a kind of signal that things might be safe, that the body can afford to relax. And sometimes, if the system is only mildly activated, that signal is enough to shift things back toward balance. But when the system is strongly engaged, when your heart is already racing and your body is fully alert, gentle signals may not be sufficient. The hidden driver is already pressing the accelerator, and your attempt to ease off using slow breathing can feel like a weak counterforce. This is where something like cold water becomes interesting. It doesn't try to negotiate with the system. It doesn't rely on interpretation or subtle messaging. Instead, it introduces a new, powerful input, one that the deeper system has been tuned to recognize for a very long time. And because this system responds to signals rather than explanations, a strong physical signal can sometimes achieve in an instant what careful mental effort cannot. It doesn't mean breathing is ineffective. It means that the pathway it uses is slower, more dependent on conditions, and less direct. What begins to emerge from this is a slightly uncomfortable realization. Control is not located where it feels like it is. The sense that you are directing everything from the center is at best incomplete. Much of what you experience as yourself is the result of processes that act first and leave you to notice afterward. And when you splash cold water on your face and feel that sudden shift, what you are really experiencing is not something you chose in the usual sense. It is something your body did, quickly, automatically, and with a kind of authority that doesn't ask for your agreement. Now imagine something happening so quickly that you don't have time to think about it. You're walking along, distracted, maybe thinking about something completely unrelated to your surroundings. Then suddenly, without warning, you slip and fall forward into a body of very cold water. Not comfortably cool, shockingly cold. The kind of cold that feels like it grabs your skin all at once. Before any clear thought forms, your body reacts. Your breath sharply pulls in or momentarily stops. Your eyes clamp shut, your face tightens, your heart changes its rhythm in a way that feels immediate and undeniable. For a brief moment, your entire system seems to reorganize itself. What's striking about this is not just the intensity of the reaction, but the speed. There is no pause where your mind evaluates the situation and decides what to do. There is no internal dialogue saying, "This is cold water, I should respond." The response is already underway before language even has a chance to appear. This tells you something important. There are pathways in your body that are faster than thought. To understand this more clearly, consider how information usually travels when you make a deliberate decision. You notice something, you interpret it, you choose an action, and then your body follows through. This process involves multiple steps, and each step takes time, even if it feels instantaneous. But in situations like sudden cold exposure, that entire chain is bypassed. Instead, sensory signals, especially from the skin of your face, are sent directly along specialized pathways to deeper regions of your brain. These regions are not concerned with reasoning or explanation. They are concerned with rapid coordination. It's almost like a shortcut has been built into your system. A direct line that says, if this specific kind of signal appears, respond immediately in a specific way. You can think of it as an emergency circuit. Not because cold water is always dangerous, but because in the environments where human physiology evolved, sudden cold exposure, especially involving the face, often meant something critical was happening. Possibly immersion in water. Possibly a situation where breathing and survival were at risk. So instead of leaving the response up to slow, uncertain thought, the body developed a faster solution. It embedded the response into the structure of the system itself. This is very different from something you learn or practice. You didn't train yourself to react this way. You didn't develop it through experience. It was already there, built into the wiring. Now compare that to something like controlled breathing. When you slow your breath on purpose, you are using a pathway that depends on awareness and intention. You are initiating the process from the level of thought, and then hoping it travels downward into these deeper systems. But the cold water response travels in the opposite direction. It starts at the level of raw sensation and moves upward and inward, triggering changes before thought can intervene. That direction, bottom to top instead of top to bottom, is what gives it its distinctive power. It doesn't rely on your ability to focus, or your willingness to engage, or even your understanding of what's happening. It simply unfolds. And because of that, the experience can feel almost surprising, as if your body has momentarily taken control in a very direct way. Not violently, not chaotically, but decisively. What you are witnessing in that moment is not just a reaction to cold. It is the expression of a deeply embedded system that has been shaped over immense stretches of time, designed to act first and leave explanation for later, if explanation comes at all. There is a particular detail that makes all of this more precise and a little more surprising. The reaction is not just about cold in a general sense. It matters very much where the cold is felt. If you place your hand in cold water, you feel it immediately. It's uncomfortable, maybe even painful, but the rest of your body doesn't reorganize itself in the same dramatic way. Your heart doesn't suddenly slow in a noticeable, coordinated pattern. Your breathing might change slightly, but nothing like the sharp shift that happens when cold water hits your face. This suggests something very specific. The body is not reacting to cold everywhere in the same way. It is especially sensitive to cold in certain regions, and the face is one of the most important. Think about the layout of the body. The face is not just another patch of skin. It's densely packed with sensory receptors. It's close to critical entry points like the eyes, nose, and mouth. And, importantly, it is wired with direct, fast connections to deeper parts of the brain. When cold water touches the skin around your eyes, nose, and forehead, signals travel along these pathways with very little delay. These signals don't take a long, winding route through layers of interpretation. They move quickly into regions that coordinate fundamental functions: heart rate, breathing patterns, blood distribution. It's almost like pressing a specific combination of keys on a machine that triggers a built-in routine. Now imagine that somewhere in this system there exists a kind of switch, not a physical button you can see, but a pattern of activity. When the right conditions are met, that pattern activates, and a whole cascade of changes follows. The moment cold water contacts your face, especially if it is sudden and intense, this pattern is triggered. Your body doesn't need to figure out what to do. The sequence is already defined. Your heart rate slows in a controlled way. Blood flow shifts toward the core of your body, protecting vital organs. Your breathing is interrupted or altered, sometimes even paused for a brief moment. These changes are coordinated, not random. And what makes this especially interesting is that you cannot will this response into existence in the same way. You cannot simply decide, I will now activate this exact pattern, and expect it to happen. The system is not designed to be turned on by intention. It is designed to be triggered by specific physical conditions. This is very different from most things we learn to do. Usually, with enough practice, you can gain voluntary control over a skill. You can learn to move more precisely, think more clearly, react more quickly. But here, the control is fundamentally indirect. You can only create the conditions that allow the system to activate itself. That's why the experience can feel almost mechanical, as if something inside you has been switched on. There is a clarity and immediacy to it that doesn't depend on your mood, your focus, or your beliefs. And yet, there is still something mysterious about it. We can trace the pathways. We can measure the signals. We can observe the outcomes. But the exact way in which this pattern produces this subjective feeling, the sense of sudden calm or reset, is harder to pin down. You can describe the movement of blood, the change in heart rhythm, the alteration in breathing. But how those physical changes translate into a shift in experience, that remains less clear. So you are left with two layers. One that we can map and measure with reasonable confidence, and another that we can feel directly but cannot fully explain. And the bridge between those two layers is still, in many ways, an open question. There is a name often given to this collection of reactions, but the name itself can be misleading if it sounds more complicated than it really is. What matters is not the label, but the pattern. When cold water touches your face, especially suddenly, and especially when it involves areas around the eyes and nose, your body begins to behave in a very particular way, not randomly, not vaguely, but in a coordinated sequence that appears again and again across different people. Your heart rate begins to slow, not gradually in the way it might during rest, but in a more immediate, noticeable shift. It is as if a signal has been sent that says, reduce activity, conserve. At the same time, blood circulation changes. Instead of being evenly distributed, more of it is directed toward the central organs, the heart, the brain, the lungs. The outer regions, like the skin and extremities, receive less. This is not something you feel directly in a detailed way, but it is happening nonetheless. Your breathing also changes, often abruptly. There may be a gasp, or a temporary pause, or a disruption in the rhythm you had just moments before. It's not smooth or controlled, it's automatic, and sometimes even a bit jarring. Taken together, these responses form a kind of internal reorganization. The body shifts from one mode to another, not because it has reasoned through a situation, but because it has recognized a pattern it has been shaped to respond to. You can think of it like a pre-written script. When certain conditions are met, the script runs. There is no need for interpretation, no need for learning in the moment. It is already there, embedded in the structure of the system. What is particularly interesting is that this pattern is not unique to humans. Variations of it can be found in many animals, especially those that interact with water in ways that involve submersion. This suggests that the pattern is not a recent development, but something much older, something that has been preserved because it works. Now here is where things become more subtle. The purpose of this response is not to calm you in the psychological sense. It is not designed to reduce anxiety, or create a sense of peace, or help you feel better about your thoughts. Its purpose is more direct, to increase the chances of survival in a situation where breathing and oxygen availability might be limited. By slowing the heart and redirecting blood, the body uses energy more efficiently. By altering breathing, it prepares for a condition where normal respiration may not be possible. Everything about the response points toward conservation and protection, and yet, when you experience it in an everyday context, standing at a sink, splashing water on your face, the effect often feels like calm. This is where interpretation begins to enter the picture. From the body's perspective, it has shifted into a mode of conservation. From your perspective, that shift can register as relief, quiet, or a reduction in intensity. But these are not the same thing. One is a physical adjustment. The other is an experience layered on top of it. This distinction matters because it reveals something subtle about how we understand ourselves. We tend to explain our feelings in terms of intention or meaning. We say, I feel calmer because I did something to calm down. But in this case, what happened is closer to my body changed its state, and my experience followed. That reversal, where the physical comes first and the feeling follows, is easy to overlook, but it may be more common than we realize. And once you begin to see it, it becomes harder to ignore how much of your inner experience might be shaped in exactly this way. Now place this side by side with something much more familiar, the act of controlling your breath. You sit still. You inhale slowly, maybe counting in your head. You exhale longer than you inhale, trying to stretch the rhythm. There is a sense that you are doing something deliberate, something careful. It feels like an attempt to guide your body from the inside, using attention as the main tool. And to some extent it works. Your breathing is one of the few processes that sits at an interesting boundary. It happens automatically. You don't need to think to keep breathing, but you can also take control of it when you choose. That makes it a kind of bridge between conscious intention and automatic function. So when you slow your breath, you are sending a signal downward into deeper systems. You are saying, in a very indirect way, things might be safe. There is no need for urgency. If the rest of your system is only slightly activated, this signal can spread. Med some cam. Your heart rate may begin to follow the slower rhythm. Muscles may loosen. Thoughts may become less crowded. But this process depends on conditions. It depends on your ability to focus, to maintain the pattern, to resist the urge to speed up again. And if your body is already in a highly activated state, heart racing, muscles tense, attention scattered, the signal from controlled breathing can feel weak by comparison. It's like trying to lower the volume of loud music by whispering instructions from across the room. The message is correct, but it struggles to compete with the intensity of what is already happening. There is also another complication. When you try to control your breathing, you are using the same system that is already involved in the problem. Your attention is engaged, your thoughts are active, and sometimes the very act of trying to calm down becomes another layer of effort. You might notice this directly. You begin a breathing pattern, but part of your mind keeps checking, is this working? Am I calmer yet? That subtle monitoring can interfere with the process, pulling you back into the same loop you were trying to escape. So while breathing gives you access to these deeper systems, it does so through a narrow channel. It requires cooperation between intention and automatic response, and that cooperation is not always stable. Now compare that with the effect of cold water on your face. There is no need to maintain a pattern, no need to focus, no need to evaluate whether it is working. The signal is immediate and strong enough that the deeper system responds without hesitation. The difference is not that one is natural and the other is artificial. Both are natural. The difference lies in how directly they engage the underlying mechanisms. Breathing is a gradual influence. It nudges the system, step by step, toward a different state. Cold water is a direct trigger. It initiates a shift all at once, without requiring sustained effort. This doesn't make one universally better than the other. It simply means they operate through different pathways with different strengths and limitations. And once you see that, the comparison becomes less about choosing one method over the other and more about understanding the structure of the system you are interacting with. How signals travel, how responses are organized, and why some inputs carry more weight than others. What looks on the surface like two ways of doing the same thing is actually a window into two very different layers of control. It helps to shift the perspective slightly and think in terms that are less biological and more mechanical, even if the comparison is not perfect. Imagine a computer system running multiple layers at once. At the top, there is the interface you interact with, the screen, the keyboard, the visible programs. You type commands, click buttons, and expect certain outcomes. This is the level where everything feels direct and under control. But beneath that, there is another layer, the operating system. And beneath that, even deeper, the hardware itself. Signals move through circuits, voltages change, components respond in ways that do not depend on what is displayed on the screen. Now suppose something goes wrong at a deep level. Perhaps the system is overheating or a circuit is overloaded. You can click buttons on the screen all you like, but those commands may not reach the part of the system where the problem exists. They are simply too far removed. Breathing exercises are a bit like interacting through the interface. You are issuing commands in a language that the system can understand, but only indirectly. The message has to travel through layers, and at each layer it can be altered, delayed, or even ignored if more urgent signals are present. Cold water, in this analogy, is closer to interacting with the hardware itself. It doesn't rely on the interface. It changes the conditions at a level the system cannot ignore, because that level is where the most basic rules are enforced. Of course, the body is not literally a computer, and analogies like this always have limits. But the comparison highlights something important. Not all inputs are equal. Some inputs are interpreted, negotiated, and sometimes resisted. Others are immediate and decisive. There is also a question of priority. Deep systems tend to prioritize signals that have historically been linked to survival. Over long periods of time, certain patterns become more important, in the sense that they demand faster and more reliable responses. Cold exposure, especially involving the face, appears to be one of those patterns. It carries a kind of built-in urgency, not because the body knows in a conscious sense that cold water is dangerous, but because the system has been shaped to treat it as significant. Breathing, on the other hand, is continuous and variable. It changes during speech, movement, rest, and sleep. Because of that, it does not carry the same immediate weight as a signal. Slowing your breath can mean many different things, and the system has to interpret it in context. This difference in priority explains why one method can feel subtle, while the other feels overwhelming. It is not about effort or discipline, it is about how the system ranks the signals it receives. There is also something else hidden in this comparison. When you use the interface, you remain aware of your role. You feel like the one who is doing something. When the hardware is affected directly, that sense of authorship fades. The change happens whether you feel responsible for it or not. This can create a strange impression. When breathing works, it feels like an achievement, something you managed to do. When cold water works, it feels more like something that happened to you. And that difference points to a deeper question. How much of what you experience is truly under your control, and how much is the result of systems that operate independently, only occasionally allowing you to influence them? The more closely you look, the more that boundary begins to blur. What seemed like a clear line between you and your body starts to look less like a line and more like a gradient, with different layers responding in different ways to different kinds of input. And in that gradient, some pathways are slow and negotiable, while others are fast and absolute. Up to this point, the picture seems almost clean. There is a physical trigger, a known pathway, and a measurable response. Cold water touches the face, signals travel quickly into deeper parts of the brain, and the body shifts into a different state. Heart rate slows, breathing changes, blood flow is adjusted. These are things that can be observed, recorded, and repeated. But then something less clear begins to appear. Two people can go through the same physical process and report very different experiences. One might feel an immediate sense of calm, almost like a reset. Another might simply feel startled or uncomfortable, with little sense of relief. The physical response may be similar, but the subjective experience, the way it feels from the inside, does not always match. This is where the limits of our understanding become more visible. We can describe the mechanics with reasonable confidence. We can trace the pathways of nerves, measure electrical activity, monitor heart rhythms, but when it comes to explaining why a particular pattern of physical changes produces a specific kind of experience, the explanation becomes less precise. There is a gap between the measurable and the felt. You can think of it like this. Imagine you are listening to music. Scientists can describe the sound waves, the frequencies, the way vibrations move through the air and into your ear. They can map how those signals are converted into neural activity in the brain. But none of that fully captures what it is like to hear the music, the texture, the emotion, the sense of movement. In the same way, describing the body's response to cold water does not fully explain the feeling that sometimes follows. There is also the question of context. Your prior state matters. If you are only mildly tense, the shift might feel subtle. If you are highly stressed, the same physical change might feel dramatic. Your expectations, your familiarity with the sensation, even your interpretation of what is happening, can influence how the experience unfolds. This makes the phenomenon harder to pin down. It is not a simple input-output machine, where the same input always produces the same output in every sense. The physical output may be consistent, but the experiential output is shaped by many additional factors. And then there is an even deeper uncertainty. We do not fully understand how higher-level processes, like thoughts, memories, and emotions, interact with these more primitive reflexes. Does the reflex simply impose a state that the mind then interprets? Or does the mind actively shape how the reflex is experienced, feeding back into the system in subtle ways? The answer is not entirely clear. This is a common situation in science. There are domains where we have strong, reliable models of what happens physically, and much weaker models of what it means subjectively. The connection between the two is real, but not fully mapped. So when you splash cold water on your face and feel something shift, you are experiencing both layers at once. There is the physical layer, where signals and responses unfold in a structured way. And there is the experiential layer, where those changes are translated into a feeling that may be described as calm, relief, clarity, or sometimes simply shock. We understand the first layer much better than the second, and that difference is not a failure. It is a reminder of how complex even the simplest experiences really are. Something as ordinary as cold water touching your skin turns out to involve fast neural pathways, ancient response patterns, shifting physiological states, and a subjective experience that cannot be fully reduced to any of those pieces alone. It looks simple from the outside, but from the inside, it opens into a question we are still trying to answer. There is a quiet tension running underneath all of this, and it has less to do with cold water or breathing, and more to do with how we understand ourselves. Most people carry an assumption so natural that it rarely gets examined. The assumption is that thoughts sit at the center, making decisions, directing actions, and explaining what happens. From this point of view, the body is something like an instrument, useful, responsive, but ultimately controlled by the mind. But situations like this begin to shift that picture. When a physical stimulus can change your state faster and more reliably than deliberate thought, it suggests that the direction of control is not always what it seems. Instead of the mind directing the body can set the conditions that the mind then experiences. You might notice this in a very simple way. After the cold water hits your face and your body changes state, your thoughts often follow. They become quieter, less urgent, less crowded. It can feel as though you have calmed your mind, but if you look closely, the sequence runs the other way. The body shifted first, and the mind adjusted afterward. This reversal is subtle, but it carries weight. It suggests that what you experience as thinking clearly or feeling calm may depend heavily on underlying physical conditions that you do not directly control. The mind does not operate in isolation. It is embedded in a system that is constantly adjusting itself. Now consider why this is difficult to accept. Humans prefer explanations that place intention at the center. It is more comfortable to believe that you calmed yourself because you decided to, because you applied a method, because you exercised control. This reinforces a sense of authorship, a sense that you are the one steering the process. But when a simple physical action produces a stronger effect than deliberate effort, that sense of authorship becomes less clear. It raises the possibility that control is distributed, layered, and sometimes located in places you cannot access directly. There is also a linguistic problem. The way we talk about experience tends to blur cause and interpretation. You might say, "I feel calm because I splashed water on my face." That sounds like a straightforward explanation, but hidden inside that sentence are multiple steps: a physical stimulus, a chain of neural responses, a shift in physiological state, and finally, a subjective interpretation of that state. Language compresses all of this into a single line, making it seem simpler than it is. This compression is useful. It allows us to communicate quickly, but it also hides complexity. It makes it harder to see how many layers are involved and how those layers interact. And once you begin to separate those layers, something interesting happens. The boundary between you and your body becomes less distinct. Are you the one producing the calm, or are you the one experiencing the result of processes already in motion? The answer is not obvious. It may be that what you call yourself is not a single controlling entity, but a collection of processes, some fast, some slow, some accessible, some hidden. In that view, deliberate breathing and cold water are not just techniques, they are ways of interacting with different levels of the same system. One speaks to the system gently, through intention and repetition. The other speaks in a language the system has been shaped to respond to immediately. And the fact that both can influence your experience, sometimes in very different ways, suggests that understanding yourself is less about finding a single point of control and more about recognizing how many layers of influence are always at work. Once you see that, the question shifts. It is no longer just what works better. It becomes what exactly is doing the working.